All right, good morning. It is Thursday, September 11th, and today is going to be, as you saw in the title, the tips for going to a tournament. These are going to be a little bit more interesting than just, hydrate. They should be actual helpful tips, I hope, and stuff to keep in mind while you're at a tournament, Warhammer or anything else, really. And then I, of course, will throw the pictures from Thursday night game night at the end of this episode since it will be coming out tomorrow on Friday. But without any further ado, let's get into those tips. All right, so tips for going to a tournament. These are going to be focused more towards Warhammer and 40k in particular for one of them, just because that's the tournament that I'm going to most coming up most recent or the soonest. They're not, so one of them won't work really for non 40k events, but that's all right. Hopefully you'll get the idea. I've got 6 of them for you, and hopefully they'll be a little more. They won't be as generic as maybe some others that people will give you. So hopefully they'll be of use to you. So the first one is bring a list that you can play in 90 minutes, or less, preferably. And it may sound a little weird because 40k rounds are not 90 minutes, but you have to keep in mind that one, you have to cut the time in half. Your opponent has half the time, and you have half the time. And if you're not able to play through 5 turns in 90 minutes with your list, if you're not comfortable enough with the list, or you don't know the stats well enough or whatever, then you're doing a disservice to your opponent by taking more of that time. And now, of course, when you're learning, that is potentially going to be impossible. In our group, we encourage people to come to tournaments, even if it's their first ever game of Warhammer. And so, obviously, for those kind of people, having a list that they can play in 90 minutes is, like I said, literally not going to be possible. But I'm talking about the people who are, have been going to events, have been playing a long time. Like, you should not be playing a list, especially if you're chasing the meta. You should not be playing a list that you don't know how to pilot. You should be able to put that army down and maybe check the book a couple times for something that you've forgotten, but otherwise you should be able to play that army and be done in 90 minutes. A great workaround for this is one of the strategies I like to do is just bring armies that you know are going to be tabled in under 90 minutes. I'm bringing Imperial Agents to the tournament this weekend. I don't know that army backwards and forwards. However, I know I'm going to get tabled long before we get to the end of the game. And so, if I'm a little bit slow, my opponent won't care because they'll have won. And it won't matter because I haven't done anything that will negatively impact their experience. So just think about that. I know that bringing a list that you know is going to lose is not a good strategy. But when thinking about bringing a list, if you have a couple armies to choose from, pick one that you know you can finish on time so as not to negatively impact your opponent. The second one is probably the most generic out of this list and is probably pops up in a lot of people's lists for tips about going to tournaments, and that is to remind your opponent if they forget to do something, especially if it's to their benefit and your detriment. I'm not saying you need to suggest to them that they do something. If they have a stratagem that in their book that is really good in this situation, you don't need to suggest that to them. You can if you want, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean things like if they have a repulsor, say, a repulsor executioner, and they say, all right, I'm gonna shoot the main gun over here, the melta-guns here, and then everything else over at this third target. And they get through the first one, and they get through the second one, and then they move on. They've forgotten to shoot at that third unit. You should remind them. I mean, obviously, if you remember. If you also forget, okay, well, say la vie. But if you remember that they've already declared that they wanted to do something, you should remind them, hey, don't forget about this. It not only builds rapport at the table, so like if you then do it later, they might remind you that you forgot to do something, but it's also just good sportsmanship. They said they were going to do something. They simply forgot. You should let them do it. All right, so number 3 is paint your models, or don't, but don't expect paint points if you don't. For some reason, I actually see this a lot at tournaments. People who aren't familiar with Battle Ready, even though they should be. They've been playing for many years, but for whatever reason, they think that Battle Ready means 3 colors and there's some primer on your base, and give me those 10 paint points. We're talking about 40k specifically in this case. And I just think that's I don't know, like, you wouldn't say let's play without the movement phase. You shouldn't say let's play without paint points. And now, again, at a Thursday night game night, if someone is brand new, doesn't have their army painted, great. You can have that conversation about, hey, let's play without paint points. But at a tournament, we're playing with paint points. You should not expect to be getting paint points if you aren't painted, and you should not expect anybody else to be giving them to you. And it may sound like kind of a silly thing, and even if it doesn't impact your game, like, I've called people on not having their army painted, like when their army isn't based, for example, if it's just sprayed a color. Their models on the bases are painted, but the bases are not based in any way. They've beaten me 90-30, and I've still called them on paint points. And while it doesn't matter in that game, it may matter for the person who ends up getting second to that person. If that person scores 100 every round, that's 300 points. Without those paint points, they're scoring 30 points less. Maybe second place scores 280 points for the day, and he or she had a fully painted army. That person has been cheated out of a win now because that person is claiming paint points that they do not deserve. So if you're going to play with the fight phase, the shoot phase, the movement phase, you should be playing with paint points. Or if you don't paint your army, that's fine, but don't expect to get those paint points. All right, number 4 is expect to be tired by the end of the tournament. Whether this is round 3 or round 5, round 7, round 9, God forbid, expect to be tired. And so just because on a one-off game night you are able to drop this Blood Angel army down and intricately place all your units so that the buffs go where they need to go, and you have this perfect like double envelopment and you win, that's great. But if you can't do that 3 times, and specifically 3 times in a row, then you probably shouldn't bring that army. Now, you can, and just understand that you may not perform as well at the end. But in my opinion, it's better to bring perhaps a more simple army that you can replicate time and time again. And then when you get to round 3, it's just like muscle memory, and it's easy. You are tired. You've played 2 games in a row, but you're ready to go, and it's all set. And then number 5, sort of in the same vein as the last one, is to have a default deployment. I know a lot of people, and especially high-end competitive players, they will think about deployments and go through them like, all right, if I'm against this kind of list, this is how I'm deploying these specific units. I'm going to deploy differently, blah, blah, blah. And that's great. If you're into that, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do that and think through those choices. However, when you're tired in game 3, that can be a lot of mental load when you don't have that much mental energy left. And so just having in your back pocket, hey, this is my default deployment. I can get into a decent position from these starting positions pretty much no matter what. Maybe it's not perfectly optimized to what the opponent has, but it's pretty good. That's a great thing to have. That doesn't mean you're always necessarily going to go to that in game 3, but it's there. And if you don't have that sort of plan in your back pocket, then you're just stuck trying to figure it out on the fly. And if you don't have the mental capacity to get there in game 3, you're going to be at a severe disadvantage potentially if you deploy wrong, or at least deploy with a severe disadvantage. And then finally, number 6 is the most important one, and I think it's something that a lot of people forget often, and that is that it is your responsibility as the other person across the table to ensure that they have fun to the best of your ability. Obviously, they might just be in a terrible mood, and no matter what you do, they're not going to have fun. But it should be your responsibility to do your best to make sure they have fun. And so, if you're losing, that means you're not making comments like, oh yeah, this game is so over, or yeah, that unit you've got is crazy, I wish GW would nerf it. You don't need to be saying stuff like that, because they are probably really happy with themselves. They won a game that, for all you know, unless you know them personally, that might be the first game they've ever won, and now they're bummed because you're just bringing the whole vibe down. So, you know, it's okay to be upset when you lose. It's okay to be sad, annoyed, whatever. But in the moment, let that person enjoy the win that they have and let them have fun. And so, one of the things that I like to do is, and I'm in this position a lot, let me tell you, probably more than a lot of you, is once you know that you've lost the game, is just like put yourselves in little situations that are going to be like feel goods for the opponent. So like, you know, when I'm playing Imperial Agents, if I'm losing 85-40 and it's turn 5, I'll let you know right now, Imperial Agents or any army piloted by me, I'm not scoring 60 points in a turn. And so, you know, I might have my Inquisitor who's sitting on an objective who could score me 10 points. It doesn't matter. Let me just charge in, let the guy overwatch me, and, you know, we'll have a final last stand and see if I can take some models out on the way out. And, you know, that's a good way for, it doesn't impact you in any way. You've lost. You've probably lost all 3 games if you're me. And, you know, now this person gets to have a fun story that they can tell. And, you know, whatever. And you don't have to go that far. You don't have to, like, purposely do things to give them little added bits of fun. But just keep in mind, it is your responsibility as the person, the other half of the game, to ensure that that person has the fun that they were looking for when they came to the tournament. All right, well, that will do it for my top tips for going to a tournament. Like I said, some of them will work for all game systems. Some of them only work for certain ones. But I think it's pretty much whole cloth good to keep in mind whenever you're going to a tournament. Really, the last one is the big thing. I almost turned this video into just a sit and chat about that last one. I think it's really important that the other person across the table has fun, and even if they don't have fun, it shouldn't be you that is removing their fun unless it's with a game mechanic. You know, obviously, if you beat the brakes off them with your great army, that's you know that's within the realm of the game. That's great, but you don't need to be like over rubbing it in if you're winning, and you don't need to be sitting there complaining if you're losing. Let them enjoy the moment, however they're going to enjoy the moment, and you know it's not going to matter at the end of the day. You can have another game, you'll win some games in the future, it'll be okay. But thank you everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would encourage you to click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you tomorrow.